All right, let's dive into some serious policy today. The Social Security Fairness Act. This bill is supposed to make Social Security fairer, but there's this whole debate, swirling around it. Some worries it could threaten the whole system. How can a bill aimed at fairness put Social Security at risk? We're talking about provisions. The WEP and the GPO, they reduce benefits for public sector workers,
Yeah.
your teachers, firefighters, anyone with a government pension. It's a big deal.
It is a big deal. What's really interesting is this isn't a partisan squabble. It's got bipartisan support. This bill sailed through the House, and looks like it will clear the Senate too. So understanding what's at stake, it's crucial for everyone.
Okay, so walk me through this. How do these WEP and GPO things actually work? It sounds like they're punishing people for having a pension.
Okay, let's start with the WEP, the windfall elimination provision. Imagine you're a teacher. You dedicated 30 years to teaching in a public school. You've been contributing to your pension all along. You even picked up a part-time job for 10 years, paying into Social Security. Now you're ready to retire. But because of that public pension, the WEP comes in and reduces your Social Security benefits. All those years of hard work. And we're not talking about a handful of people. This affects over 2 million people.
That does seem rough. So the GPO, the government pension offset, is that doing something similar,
Yeah,
but for spouses?
exactly. Let's say your spouse worked for the government
Yeah.
and earned a pension. They pass away. And you start receiving their pension, the GPO kicks in and might reduce your own Social Security benefits. Spouses, widowers, about
Yeah.
745,000 people.
Hearing the numbers like that, it really drives home how many lives this impacts, but there must be a reason these provisions exist.
Right. Why would anyone think the system is fair? Well, the argument for keeping the WEP and GPO is that public workers shouldn't be double dipping, getting benefits from both their pensions and Social Security. They've been around for over 40 years, but there's a growing feeling that they're outdated, and they unfairly penalize public servants.
Okay. I can see that side. It does seem off to punish people for years of service. Didn't Representative even call it discrimination?
You're right. Representative Garrett Graves, one of the bill's sponsors, he used that word during the House debate. And he's not alone. Organizations like the National Committee to Preserve Social Security and Medicare, they are advocating for the bill too. They see it as a huge win for public employees and their families.
So we've got strong arguments for fairness, solid support. But something tells me there's another side to this story, especially when it comes to money. What are the financial concerns?
That's where things get tricky. The Congressional Budget Office, the CBO, estimates that this bill would add almost $200 billion to the deficit over the next decade. That's a staggering amount, and it raises some red flags about Social Security's long-term health.
Whoa, $200 billion. That's not just pocket change. But for someone like me, who isn't an economist, help me understand, what does a number like that actually mean?
Think of it this way. Social Security relies on a trust fund, money from payroll taxes that's supposed to cover future benefits. The problem is, that trust fund is projected to run dry by 2033. If nothing changes, Social Security will only be able to pay out about 79% of what it's promised. Now,
Yeah.
toss in this extra $200 billion burden from the Fairness Act. That depletion day could come even sooner, with potentially deeper cuts down the line.
Okay, now it's clicking. So while aiming for fairness, this bill could actually accelerate the financial crisis that's already looming over Social Security. That's a lot to process.
It is, and we've only just begun to scratch the surface.
All right, so let's keep digging. We've covered the arguments for the bill. Now I want to hear from those who aren't so thrilled. What are the biggest concerns from the critics?
Well, Representative John Larson has emerged as a vocal critic, and he actually agrees the WEP and GPO need to be addressed. His issue with the current bill, it doesn't have a plan to pay for itself. He's worried that passing it without a clear funding mechanism could end up hurting the most vulnerable, those who rely on those benefits to survive.
That's a sobering thought. Trying to fix one problem might create a new set of issues for those who can least afford it. So does Larson have any alternative ideas?
He does. He has a counterproposal, the Social Security 2100 Act. The details are complex, but the core idea is simple: increase revenue to make Social Security sustainable. Instead of just adding to the spending, he wants to raise payroll taxes for higher earners, essentially asking those who can contribute more to help ensure the survival for everyone.
Interesting. So it's a different approach, focusing on bolstering the system rather than pushing through potentially costly changes. Are there any other perspectives we should be aware of?
There are. And one I find particularly thought-provoking comes from the Cato Institute, a libertarian think tank. Romina Boccia, their budget expert, says the Fairness Act is too narrow in its focus. She argues we need to think bigger, reimagine the whole system to provide basic income security for all Americans in retirement, regardless of their work history. It's a much broader change than just tweaking a couple of provisions.
So she's basically saying, don't just patch the holes, rethink the whole darn boat. That's a pretty bold stance. It seems like this debate has expanded beyond public pensions and is now touching on some really fundamental questions about Social Security's future.
You're right, and that's what makes this discussion so fascinating. It's not just about technicalities. It's about values, priorities, and the kind of society we want to build.
Right, so we've laid out the arguments, the concerns, the different perspectives, but at this point, our listeners probably wondering, what does this all mean for me?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Whether or not this bill passes. The future of Social Security is anything but certain. We're facing a financial reckoning. And the choices we make today will have profound implications for everyone, not just those nearing retirement. This isn't just an abstract policy debate. It's about your financial security, your future, your ability to enjoy retirement without worrying about making ends meet.
Okay, that's a good reality check. So
Yeah.
what should our listener be thinking about?
I'd say there are two key things to consider. First, fairness. Do you believe public workers are being unfairly penalized under the current system? Second, sustainability. Can we afford to implement these changes without jeopardizing Social Security for everyone? There's no right or wrong answer here, but it's crucial to weigh both sides and decide which resonates more with you.
That's great advice. Fairness versus sustainability. It's a complex issue, and I think you've done a fantastic job of breaking it down, but this is a deep dive, so we're not done yet. We've got a lot more ground to cover. I, for one, am ready to keep exploring. Stay tuned, folks.
I'm looking forward to it. This conversation is far from over. It strikes me that what we're grappling with is this tension between individual fairness and the collective good. How do we ensure that specific groups aren't unfairly burdened by a system designed to benefit everyone? It's a question that goes beyond Social Security.
It really does. It's like we're trying to fine-tune this massive machine with millions of moving parts, and every adjustment has these ripple effects that we can't always predict. It makes you realize how complex policymaking is.
It really does. And I think that's why it's so important to have these open and honest conversations, to acknowledge the trade-offs, and to recognize that there's rarely a perfect solution. It's about finding the best possible path forward, even if it means making some tough choices.
Okay, but how do we even begin to make those choices? We've got this looming financial crisis with Social Security, and now this Fairness Act throws even more fuel on the fire. It's enough to make your head spin.
You're right. It can feel overwhelming. But I think that's where informed debate comes in. We need to move beyond sound bites and partisan talking points and really dig into the issue, understanding the different perspectives, the potential consequences, both intended and unintended. That's how we start to make sense of this complex landscape.
That's not just about picking a side. It's about understanding the nuances, the gray areas, the fact that there might not be a clear right answer.
Exactly. And about being willing to challenge our own assumptions, to consider viewpoints that might differ from our own. That's what true critical thinking is all about. Not just accepting what we hear at face value, but actively engaging with the information, questioning, analyzing.
And forming your own conclusions.
I like that. Questioning, analyzing, forming our own conclusions. That's what this deep dive is all about.
Right.
Giving our listener the tools to think critically about these complex issues and to reach their own decisions precisely. We're not here to tell people what to think, but to equip them with the knowledge and context they need to navigate these challenging debates. And hopefully to inspire them to continue learning and exploring on their own.
You know, that's what I find so exciting about this whole process. It's not just about absorbing information. It's about sparking curiosity, igniting that desire to delve deeper, to understand not just the what, but the why.
I couldn't agree more. And that's why I believe these deep dives are so valuable. They provide that springboard for deeper exploration, for continued learning and discovery. We're planting seeds here, and who knows what they might bear.
I love that analogy. We're like intellectual gardeners, cultivating a landscape of knowledge and understanding. Okay, so we've talked about the Fairness Act, the financial challenges facing Social Security, the different perspectives on how to address those challenges, but I feel like we're still just scratching the surface here.
You're right. There's so much more to unpack, so many layers to this debate. And I think it's important to acknowledge that there's no one-size-fits-all solution. What works for one person or group might not work for another. That's why this conversation about fairness and sustainability is so crucial.
Okay, so let's talk about solutions. We've got Larson's proposal to increase revenue, Boshi's idea of a complete overhaul, and then there's the option of just letting the Fairness Act play out and seeing what happens. It seems like we're at a crossroads.
We are. And I think it's important to remember that there's no magic bullet,
Hmm.
no single policy change that's going to fix everything. This is about long-term planning, about making strategic choices that will ensure the viability of Social Security for generations to come.
That sounds like a daunting task. Where do we even begin?
Well, I think the first step is to move beyond this idea of us versus them, this notion that it's public sector workers against everyone else. We need to recognize that we're all in this together, that the health of Social Security affects everyone, regardless of their occupation or income.
So, it's about finding common ground, recognizing our shared stake in this system.
Exactly. And it's about being willing to compromise, to acknowledge that we might not get everything we want, but by working together, we can find solutions that are both fair and sustainable.
Okay, that makes sense. But let's be realistic. Compromise is hard. People have strong opinions, and they're not always willing to budge. How do we even bridge those divides?
That's where things get interesting. It's about building empathy, about understanding where the other side is coming from. Even if we don't agree with them, it's about listening, not just to respond, but to truly hear and understand the concerns and perspectives of those who might hold different views.
You're talking about a fundamental shift in how we approach these debates. It's not about winning or losing, but about finding solutions that work for everyone.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that we're all part of this larger tapestry, that our individual threads are interwoven
Yeah.
in ways that we might not always see,
Mm.
and that by strengthening those connections, by weaving a more resilient fabric, we can create a system that supports us all.
That's a powerful image, a tapestry of interconnected lives, all reliant on this shared safety net. But weaving that tapestry sounds like a pretty monumental task. It's not something that's going to happen overnight.
You're right. This is a long game, a marathon, not a sprint. It's about changing hearts and minds, about building a culture of shared responsibility and collective action. And it starts with each of us.
Okay. I'm feeling a little more optimistic. Not gonna lie, I was starting to get bogged down in all the doom and gloom about Social Security's future. But hearing you talk about this tapestry, it gives me hope. It makes me think that maybe, just maybe, we can find a way forward together.
I share your optimism. It won't be easy, but I believe it's possible. I think it starts with recognizing the power of individual action, even small steps, like educating ourselves about the issues, engaging in respectful dialogue, advocating for policies we believe in. Those actions can have a ripple effect, inspiring others to do the same.
So, it's not just about waiting for someone else to fix it. It's about taking ownership, about being part of the solution.
Precisely. And that's why I believe these deep dives are so important.
Yeah.
They empower individuals with the knowledge and tools. They need to become active participants in shaping the future. It's about moving from passive observers to informed, engaged citizens.
All right. I'm ready to roll up my sleeves and get to work. But before we charge off on our mission to save Social Security, we've got one more segment of this deep dive to go.
I'm looking forward to it. We've covered a lot of ground,
Yeah.
but there's still more to explore. You know, as we've been talking about all this, the solutions, the approaches,
Yeah.
I keep thinking back to something you said earlier about fairness versus sustainability. It
Yeah.
seems like those two goals, they're often at odds, especially when it comes to Social Security.
Yeah. It's like we want a system that's equitable, that treats everyone fairly, and ensures no one is left behind. But we have to acknowledge that resources are limited, and we need to make choices to ensure the system survives long term.
It's a classic dilemma, isn't it?
It is. And that's where it gets tricky, because
Yeah.
sometimes those choices involve making tough calls that might not feel fair to everyone. It's like a puzzle. Every piece you fit in creates a gap somewhere else.
It's a delicate balancing act.
For sure.
And it requires us to think beyond simple solutions and to embrace the complexity. It's not about finding the perfect answer, because honestly, there might not be one.
Yeah.
It's about making informed choices
Yeah.
that put fairness and sustainability first.
Yeah.
And recognizing that sometimes we have to compromise.
Okay. But how do we navigate that? We're not all policy experts. How can the average person make sense of this and contribute to a solution?
That's a great question. And I think it starts with recognizing we all have a role to play. It's not just the politicians and policymakers. Informed citizenry is essential. And that means
Yeah.
engaging with these issues, even when they feel overwhelming.
What does that look like? What can our listener do to get more engaged?
Well, first, stay informed. Read articles, listen to podcasts like this one, educate yourself about the challenges and the proposals. Don't just rely on sound bites or social media. Dig deeper. Seek out different perspectives. Challenge yourself to understand the nuances.
Okay. Stay informed. What else?
Once you understand the issues, don't be afraid to speak up. Talk to your friends and family. Share what you've learned. Encourage them to join the conversation. Contact your elected officials. Let them know where you stand. The more we talk about this, the more we normalize it, the better equipped we'll be to find solutions that work for everyone.
I love that. Moving beyond passive consumption to active engagement. It's about recognizing we have a voice and using it to shape the future.
Exactly. And remember, you don't have to be an expert
Yeah.
to have an opinion
No.
or to make a difference. Every voice matters.
Yeah.
And collective action starts with individual engagement. Don't underestimate the power of your voice.
Okay. I'm feeling inspired. But before we send our listener off on their mission, I think it's time to step back and look at the bigger picture. We've talked about pensions, finances, policy proposals. But ultimately, this is all about people.
Right? Absolutely. It's about ensuring everyone has the opportunity to live a dignified life in retirement, free from financial worry. It's about creating a society that values its elders, that recognizes their contributions, and ensures their well-being.
And that's something we can all get behind. It's about recognizing our shared humanity and working together to create a future where everyone has the opportunity to thrive.
Well said. I think that's a perfect note to end on.
I agree. So to our listener, we hope this deep dive into the Social Security Fairness Act has left you feeling informed, empowered, and maybe even a little inspired. We've explored the complexities, the challenges, the potential solutions. But ultimately, the future of Social Security is in our hands. It's up to each of us to stay engaged, to speak up, and to work together to create a system that is both fair and sustainable.
We have no doubt you're up to the challenge.
And until next time, happy
Wow.
diving!
Happy diving.